Hello, and welcome to today's Trainer Education webinar, Learning to Listen in the Digital Workplace, hosted by HRDQ and presented by Laurie Ribble Libove. Today's webinar will last approximately an hour. Do stay tuned at the conclusion of the broadcast for an exclusive offer. Before we begin, look in the upper right-hand corner for most of you. It's a question-answer window. You can use that window to submit any questions you have throughout the webinar, and then we'll either answer your questions as they come in throughout the session, at the end of the session when we have a live Q&A, or then by email after the session. My name is Sarah Montgomery, and I will moderate today's webinar. I am in business development for HRDQ, a publisher of research-based training solutions that improve the performance of individuals, teams, and organizations. Laurie is our presenter today, and she is a specialist in strategic human resource management and organizational development. She earned an MS from the School of Management and Labor Relations at Rutgers University and a BS in economics from the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. Prior to joining Napa Valley College in 2009, Laurie was a visiting lecturer at the Haas School of Business, University of California, Berkeley, and an instructor in the MBA program at Dominican University of California. Her publication credits include training tools on change management, visionary leadership, team trust, and listening. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today, Laurie.
Thanks for that introduction, Sarah, and a warm welcome to everyone who has joined us for today's webinar. Based on the weather map that I saw this morning, it looks like most of us, at least in the U.S., are facing some pretty cold temperatures out there. I'm broadcasting actually from the San Francisco Bay Area, and we've had many days of frost, which is quite unusual for us, but we have basically nothing to complain about, especially compared to the rest of the country, except for maybe Florida. It looked like they were enjoying some really good sunshine and warm temperatures. So anybody listening from Florida know that we need you to send us some of that sunshine and those warmer temps. So thank you, and thank you for being here, and especially taking time out of your busy schedule during the holidays and end of year work crush. So I'm really excited to be here applying the behavioral model from learning to listen to the digital workplace. Learning to listen is a long-time customer favorite at HRDQ, and I suspect that's because as training and development professionals, most of us probably view listening as a vital foundation skill that enables higher levels of performance in more complex skills like negotiating or managing conflict. And while that's certainly true, I would also suggest that with the ongoing increase in the number of online communication channels, listening itself as a skill has become a much more complex and multifaceted skill. Actually, Sarah, I'm going to ask you to advance the slide because thank you, my screen is not playing back. Okay, so as you can see from the agenda, we're going to be covering the basics of listening today, but we're also going to look at the ways that listening has changed as a result of the digital workplace, and then we'll explore how we can help our employees extend and adapt their listening skills to this evolving environment. So I think it's fair to start by asking this question. In a world where everyone is talking, does listening still matter? And in fact, I would argue that listening matters more than ever, and that's simply because it has become so rare. I would challenge each of you to think about the last time that you felt completely and deeply listened to. If you're really lucky, maybe it was earlier today or over the past weekend, but I'm guessing that for many of us, our most recent experience of being listened to, especially in the workplace, was probably more than a week ago, maybe even more than a month ago. Whenever it was, I want you to take a moment and reflect on how it felt to be listened to. And if the words special and respected, valued, and cared for come to mind, you're not alone. Listening really remains one of the most powerful and effective ways that we have to convey regard for our family and friends and coworkers and customers. Just the very act of listening says to the other person, I see you and I value you, and what you have to say truly matters to me. So in so many ways, being listened to has become kind of like the ultimate luxury. And, you know, that pretty much makes it a terrific gift any time of the year. So it's great to be listened to. But for any of us to be on the receiving end of that gift, someone else has to be doing the listening. And if listening only benefits the person who's being listened to, then it's going to be a pretty tough sell, especially in training and development. But in fact, being a good listener yields quite a few benefits, both at the individual level and for organizations. So let's take a look at those benefits. At the individual level, I'd say that the most rewarding aspect of being a good listener is that it pretty much guarantees you're going to be the most popular person in the room. And, you know, I know this firsthand because my dad is the absolute best listener I've ever known in my whole life. And anyone else who's ever had the opportunity to meet my dad and speak with him immediately realizes what a terrific listener he is. And people remember this and then tend to specifically seek him out just for the opportunity of being listened to. And over time, this has kind of made my dad a very sought-after individual. Whenever he's at a party or a social gathering, there's this little line or queue forming up for people waiting for the opportunity to be listened to by Bill. So in addition to making you a very sought-after guest at dinner parties and whatnot, being a good listener offers some other rewards too. In the short run, it can really help you to build rapport with whoever you're listening to. And in the long run, that rapport can lead to the development of interpersonal trust, which we know is a very important or essential element in our relationships and also in the performance of our organizations. Listening can also provide you with information, and that information may prove helpful or maybe even valuable in future interactions. And you get this information because people tend to open up to listeners, and they often end up revealing more than they intended to or even realize. Listening can also help you to develop insights into people's backgrounds and kind of what makes them tick. So that makes it a lot easier to motivate and manage and influence them. So in short, being a good listener doesn't just make you well-liked, it can also make you more effective at your job and quite possibly more promotable. So in addition to these personal rewards, listening also yields rewards for the organization. And in fact, developing the listening skills of your employees can be one of the best training investments your organization can make. And this is basically for two reasons. The first is that listening supports or enables so many of the other skills that your employees will need to develop as they progress throughout their careers. So whether you're in a situation where you kind of have to do training triage because you've got limited budget, or maybe you've got the luxury of being able to fund a very comprehensive employee development strategy, listening and training and listening is a really good place to start. The second reason is that listening is a completely portable skill. And we know that in this era of where we're asking our employees to take more and more personal responsibility for their own professional growth and career development, employees really value and appreciate any training that we provide to them that they can take with them. So when you invest in training a fundamental skill like listening, the organization benefits from this kind of immediate boost in employee performance, and you end up winning a lot of bonus points in the employee satisfaction column because you're providing career development that they can take elsewhere with them. So that's all the good news, but there's always the flip side. And in this case, the bad news is that listening has just never been that easy. And thanks to the digital workplace, it's more challenging than ever. Especially as the number and type of online communication channels have increased, the challenges of listening effectively across all those channels have also multiplied. So I'd like to pull your voices into this conversation at this point and kind of get a sense of the challenges that you're experiencing with listening. And we're going to bring up the chat screen and get your input. So, you know, take a moment or two and think about this question that we've got up, and you can type your response into the chat window on your screen. And in thinking about your response, really try to focus in on the single biggest obstacle that you're experiencing. It could be on a personal level or organizational level, but we're looking for the kind of the one big thing that's making it most difficult for you to listen effectively. So let's see what's coming up here. Aha, yes. Oh, wow. Yes, we're seeing things like technology interruptions and people interruptions. I see multitasking coming up all the time. Noise, thinking about what you're going to say next, being upset about the message, email interruptions, interruptions from smartphones, text pagers, yeah, all of this. Wow. I think we've, I'm seeing, we're getting lots and lots of responses to this. One just said not wanting to hear the real truth, not having enough time. Wow, I think we've really struck a nerve here, and great. Yep. So your responses track very closely to what we actually see reported in the business press and in the practitioner journals. So let me try to kind of summarize your responses and put some structure around them that could be helpful from a training perspective. Okay, I'm trying to, Sarah, I'm going to ask you to see, thanks, great. So when we think about barriers to listening, kind of two broad categories tend to emerge. And the first category relates to what we would think of as kind of classic or fundamental challenges of listening. And the second category relates to challenges that have really emerged as a result of the digital workplace. So looking first at the fundamental challenges, those really fall into two categories: internal distractions and external distractions. And internal distractions are created by conditions that are within us. And there are things that compromise our capacity to listen. They might be physical, or mental, or emotional. You know, for example, maybe we're not feeling well, and maybe we've got pain or discomfort that's really hurting our ability to listen. Maybe we're just in a really bad mood, and we're stewing about something that has upset us emotionally. Maybe what the speaker is talking about just simply isn't kind of our strongest subject, and we're kind of struggling on an intellectual or cognitive level with those kinds of distractions. In contrast, external distractions are created by all sorts of conditions outside of ourselves that also make it difficult to listen. And these distractions can be environmental or context-driven stimulus, everything from ambient noise or, you know, temperature, even the weather, something visual like a computer screen or a TV that's, you know, kind of taking our attention away. And it's important to keep in mind that these kinds of distractions don't just compete for or divert our attention, but they also have the potential to actually distort our attention. Because of the impact they might have on our thoughts and feelings. For example, you know, you could be out with a good friend enjoying dinner and a great conversation, but if the restaurant that you're at has a TV within sight, you know, all it takes is a glimpse of an upsetting news item, and it shifts your emotional state, and it also shifts your capacity to be able to listen to your friend. So in addition to these fundamental challenges of listening, the digital workplace has introduced a whole new range of obstacles. And based on your responses to the chat question, I can tell all of you are very well familiar with these challenges, and we really don't need to belabor them. But I would say this. I think sometimes it's easy to forget just how much more intense the work environment has become, especially in the last 5 to 7 years. A good way to try and really grasp the magnitude of the change is just by comparing the images on these past two slides. I mean, on the previous slide, we had a woman who was nearly having to signal to an in-person visitor to, please wait until she, finished or completed her phone call. And, from where we sit in today's world, that looks like, a really easy breezy day. On the slide we have in front of us, we see a much more familiar scene where someone's, juggling multiple conversations on multiple devices while on a phone call, and I'm guessing that for, some of us, even this looks like a mild version of our typical multitasking demand. So with the number and intensity of the obstacles that we have to listening, to listening? How can we cope just as humans? And then also, how can we respond to this as training and development professionals? And I would suggest 6 core strategies. And the first is to really work on strengthening and extending your employees' fundamental listening skills. The second strategy is to leverage or manage technology as appropriate. You know, technology can be both an ally and an enemy in our quest to be effective listeners. And the key is to make the most of technology in the situations where it can help, and to also be aware of ways that you can manage it or minimize it in situations where it's actually impairing your capacity to listen. Now, strategies 3, 4, and 5 are actually very related, and you can think of them as basically applying the concept of situational leadership to the challenge of listening. And then finally, strategy 6 is to develop an organizational language and some norms around listening. So we're going to be exploring all of these strategies in a lot more detail. But let's go ahead and start with the first one, which is how do we strengthen fundamental listening skills. So on the surface, listening seems pretty simple and straightforward, so much so that it might even feel a little bit insulting to ask employees, especially our managers or leaders, to attend training for it. But as with a lot of things that look easy, when you actually try to improve someone's ability to listen, it becomes clear that it's actually an incredibly complex skill, and it's comprised of many behaviors. The key to improving performance in listening then becomes a matter of diagnosing which behavior or behavior someone is weakest on, and then focusing all of their development efforts on those behaviors. That's really the beauty of a tool like HRDQ's Learning to Listen, because it focuses on behavior, not on style. And that makes the results of the assessment very actionable for your employees. So let's take a look at the behavioral model that underlies learning to listen. And you can see that the model organizes listening behaviors into 3 key dimensions, and that is staying focused, capturing the message, and helping the speaker. And to help us kind of think about how these behaviors are performed by a listener while being perceived by a speaker, we place these dimensions along a spectrum from being mostly invisible to mostly visible, which is kind of an interesting twist for a skill that most of us tend to think of as being purely auditory. And I find that it also helps people really think about and better understand what each of the dimensions entails. So let's take a look at each of these, starting with staying focused. Staying focused is a dimension that is almost entirely invisible. Like the slide says, it's an inside job. So it's all about the stuff that goes on inside the listener, physically, emotionally, and mentally. And it's also about being able to self-monitor and exercise self-discipline and willpower in overcoming distractions. It takes quite a bit of emotional intelligence is really what it boils down to on many levels. Like the slide says, it's an inside job, and it's almost entirely invisible, but it also has a small element of visibility, because if a listener is failing to stay focused, you can bet that the speaker is going to be able to tell that the listener's attention has drifted. So that part of it becomes visible. For most people, staying focused is the single most challenging aspect of listening. And when you find someone who comes across to you as just kind of like a naturally good listener, it's typically because they're just exceptionally good at staying focused. And you should approach them and find out what their secret to staying focused is. If you're someone who needs to improve on this dimension, you'll probably get the most benefit from eliminating or minimizing external distractions in your listening environment. So kind of once you're able to quiet some of the outside noise or get some control over it, then the extent of the inside noise will become a lot more apparent, and then you can kind of move on to some of the techniques for quieting your mind as well. So we're going to be touching on some of those techniques in just a few slides, but for now let's look at the second dimension, which is capturing the message, or proving that you're focused. Capturing the message is partly visible and partly invisible. And it's about making sure that you're capturing the message that the speaker intends you to take away, not what you hope to hear, wanted to hear, or what you want to say about the subject. So the invisible work of this dimension happens inside the listener's mind, and it's mostly about managing your cognitive biases, or basically all of the tricks that our minds can play on us. It's also a little bit about managing the mental ego as well. The visible work of this dimension occurs in the listener's interactions with the speaker, and those are interactions that are intended specifically to clarify or confirm the listener's understanding of the speaker's message. So people who are good at capturing the message tend to just be kind of naturally open-minded and very curious people. They're just curious about the world around them. They tend not to get that attached to a specific platform, and they also are pretty good at managing their own egos, and that's another one where you find someone, when you find someone who's really good at this, you need to ask them what their secrets are. So our third dimension, which is helping the speaker, is almost entirely visible, and it's all about sending the signals that show the speaker you're paying attention to them. And this is so much easier to do when you're listening face-to-face than when you're online, because when you're face-to-face, of course, or maybe in a video conference, or FaceTime or Skyping, you have the full range of nonverbal communication available to you. You can, sit up straight, you can lean in, you can nod your head, use appropriate facial expressions. But keep in mind that the flip side is it's also a lot harder to fake listening when you're face-to-face, because all of these signals are completely exposed to, are visible to the speaker. So this dimension can be particularly challenging for people who have a hard time with nonverbal communication. Maybe they're just a little bit more reserved, and they're not that expressive with their body language. Or maybe they're just not that skilled at either self-observing, noticing, and adjusting their own nonverbal signals. It's also kind of important to note here not to go overboard with this dimension. Excessive nonverbal signals can actually be a distraction to the speaker, and they can sometimes even come across as insincere, like you're trying too hard or you're trying to fake it. So it's important to really think about striking the right balance with this particular dimension. So with an understanding of these fundamentals in place, let's actually let's move to a poll and get a sense of how our audience members think they would score on these three dimensions. We're going to do a quick poll here, and what we're asking is, which aspect of listening in person do you think that you are most skilled at? Is it staying focused, capturing the message, helping the speaker, or maybe you are a superstar and you're good at all three? And that's entirely possible. So don't be too modest here. If you really are good at all three, let us know. So let's see how our poll is coming up. Here we go. I'm watching our responses coming in. This is really interesting. Still getting a few more people voting. Okay, we're almost there. Anybody else who wants to weigh in, jump in now, and then I'll reveal to us what your group responses were. Okay, yeah, I think we're in good shape with that, and Sarah, I guess, closed the poll and gave us our responses. So this is actually pretty much what I would expect to see, and I also believe that this tracks pretty closely with the actual data that we have from respondents who have completed the Learning to Listen assessment and shared that data with us. People tend to be most skilled at helping the speaker, and I think some of that's about really some of it's culturally driven. And I think also helping the speaker is the part where we can actually inject some of our own personality and ego into it as a listener, and so it kind of fits with some of our, default patterns as people. The next most skilled group was in capturing the message, and this also I would expect. And we see that the skill at which we feel least good is staying focused, and I'm not at all surprised about that. We're actually going to be digging in on some additional techniques for staying focused in just a few slides. And we've got a few lucky people. Wow, almost 20%, almost 1 in 5 of the persons out in our webinar audience today feel that they're good at all three. And frankly, that doesn't surprise me either, because as training and development professionals, one of our most important assets is to be able to be very effective listeners. So, not surprising. So, some of you might be wondering after this poll, hey, if I'm so good at listening in person, does that also mean I'm going to be good at listening in a digital workplace? And I kind of hate to tell you this, but the answer is, well, not necessarily. That's because, especially as we saw earlier in the webcast, the digital workplace has added a whole new range of challenges to the task of listening. And it could be that you're really good at listening because you're good at managing the fundamental challenges, but not quite as skilled at managing these new challenges that have come into the workplace. So fortunately, the behavioral model that we have for learning to listen still holds up in this new context. But what we do need to do is kind of up our game in each of the 3 dimensions. And it really becomes a matter of saying, how can we extend our fundamental listening skills to the digital workplace? Listening in the digital workplace relies on all of the same fundamental skills as listening in person, but because the challenges you encounter when you apply those skills are often different, and they're almost always more intense. So let's look at ways that we can extend our fundamental skills in this much more challenging environment, and starting with staying focused in the digital workplace. Modern life has just made it a real challenge to stay focused, and we saw from your responses to the polling question that it's difficult to stay focused even in face-to-face, in-person conversations, let alone in the digital environment. And, personally, I don't think there's a single bigger threat to our productivity or our fulfillment than this kind of constant battle that's going on for our attention that's coming from all these devices and channels. Daniel Goleman, who is the author of all of the emotional intelligence work, has a new book out on this subject, and it's called Focus, the Hidden Driver of Excellence. And while I've only read excerpts of this book so far, I certainly agree with the premise in the title, and I believe that many of the techniques that he reports on have great application to listening in the digital workplace. So I've actually taken some of the recommendations on this slide from the excerpts in chapters from his book, but I would also encourage you to take a look at that book if you want some additional insights. So let's step through these. Consider a daily practice that boosts your mindfulness. Now, when we think about mindfulness, we kind of immediately jump to, oh, you mean meditation or breathing exercises. And in fact, there's a much broader range of practices that you can engage in that might help boost your mindfulness. And that could be, running, walking, spending a few minutes out in your garden, puttering around every day. For some people, painting is really boosts mindfulness. So it's not so much that it has to be just meditation or breathing exercises, but you need to find something that kind of, brings you back to kind of your own center and helps you kind of block out the whole world, because the more that you're able to experience that on a day-to-day basis, the more that you're able to click into that feeling when you need to and when you're being barraged with so many distractions. I also recommend that you schedule your most intense listening tasks or situations for those times when you're most alert. You know, if you know that you're a morning person, that's when you should be scheduling meetings where you know you need to be on for listening. Or maybe you're not the kind of person that can do that. Maybe you're better, you know, doing intense listening over a meal, over breakfast or lunch, whatever it is. Know when you are at your peak listening capacity and set yourself up for success in staying focused by matching up those most challenging listening situations with when you're going to be at your best. Now, the third recommendation of limiting multitasking as much as possible is probably not, doesn't feel very realistic to most of us. And even as I say it, I go, oh, you know, how can you actually do this? I think that the real driver here is to know that the more that we learn about the human brain and neuroscience, the more that we discover that multitasking is not that great for our brains, and it's not that great for our productivity. And so we might be getting the illusion that we're accomplishing much more, but in fact we're not being nearly as efficient, effective, and productive as we might think we are. So what I would really throw out is just be really alert when maybe you're in multitasking overdrive and might need to step back from that, especially if you're approaching a very intense listening situation. Think about using noise filtering headphones. I think especially in some of the more open work environments, so many employers have gone to these, you know, very open collaborative work environments, which are terrific on many levels, but then on other levels they can be actually very physically noisy, and there's so many conversations going on that there's a lot of auditory distraction. So sometimes if you need to be listening on a phone conversation, or you need to be focusing on even an online conversation and typing, those noise filtering headphones can help you stay focused. And then finally, you know, maximizing whatever screen you're on and blocking pop-up alerts. You know, how many of us have been, you know, focused on an online conversation, and then we get an alert that a new email message has come in, and it's from, you know, someone like our boss, and we're concerned about it, and it's a topic that we know is a hot topic, and immediately our attention and focus just goes right away from the conversation we're on, and we're thinking about the latest pop-up. So especially when you need to stay focused on an intense listening situation, make sure that you've only got one screen in front of you and you're giving it your full attention. Okay, I have a little bit of comic levity and relief to throw in here. Here's another way that we can deflect interruptions, especially in work environments where we're in an open cubicles with lots of coworkers stopping by to say hi and check in on us and help be a distraction and take us away from our work. And I realize that this is probably kind of difficult for you to read on many screens, but I'll just give you the first few, the gist of it, the first few lines. This very savvy guy has taped a sign to his back that says, "Do not disturb. I am on a tight schedule today. Exceptions in case of emergency are in fact permitted. Here is the emergency checklist." Well, what qualifies as an emergency? Are you on fire and I'm the only one that can put you out? Am I on fire and I don't realize it? Or is it the second coming? And then he lists a lot of frequently asked questions, exactly what a coworker would stop by and, you know, chat about that, you know, we really don't have time for when we're trying to stay focused. So hopefully maybe the next time that you're encountering this kind of level of interruption in the workplace, you can give this particular technique a try. So, okay, on to the next dimension, capturing the message in a digital workplace. So you'll remember that this dimension is all about kind of controlling our mind's desire to jump to conclusions and, you know, hear what we want to hear and jump in and interrupt with our own thoughts. And as it turns out, digital media or online communication channels actually provide some unique opportunities for us to avoid or manage these mental pitfalls. Let's take a look at those. Particularly, I would point out item number 2, which is resisting the temptation to compose a response until you've received a reply. I mean, how many of us have been in the middle of an IM chat or texting back and forth with a colleague or a manager, and we think we know what they're going to say, and we want to be ready for it. We want to have our response just all typed out and just sitting right in the response field so that we can press send. And it's important within the digital environment especially to keep that don't know mind. Yes, you think you know what they're going to reply and you want to be ready, but stay open and don't become attached to a particular response by having already typed it into the response field. Another technique that I strongly recommend is to read any post or Yelp or IM message and even email twice before you even think about composing a response or replying. And that's because, again, our minds play tricks on us. And we might read someone's post or Yelp or IM very quickly, and because we know what we want them to say or what we wish they were saying, we reply based on what our mind is hoping for. So taking even an extra 2 seconds to reread their response can often save us the embarrassment of making it clear that we didn't capture their message and we're not listening. Another important technique is to ask the speaker to restate or repeat their message. And this is if you're at all unsure, and I mean at all unsure. There's so many cues that we miss in the digital environment. We don't have necessarily voice inflection. It's sometimes hard to gauge emotion because we don't get the facial expression all the time. So if you have any doubt about understanding what they really meant, asking clarifying questions can really help. Even saying, could you just put that to me another way? And then the last recommendation I have is having a few kind of go-to follow-up questions that you can always use. And this kind of helps buy time in particularly heated digital exchanges. If you always know that you can, say, well, you know what, I really, can you give me some time to think about that, or could you tell me a little bit more, or how did you find this out, or where are you getting this information? Any kind of go-to response that buys you time and also gets more information out of the speaker can help you truly capture what they meant to say. All right, moving on to the third dimension of helping the speaker in a digital workplace. And here I can't emphasize how important it is to respond or acknowledge as quickly as possible. And I would put an underline and bold, italicize the word acknowledge, because there's this extreme responsiveness expectation that exists in the digital workplace. And what we used to be able to say, oh, well, they'll get back to me in a day or two, or, oh, well, it's been a week, maybe I should check in with them. Now, it's been 3 seconds, why haven't they responded to me? I'm furious, are they ignoring me? And so when you think about how you help a speaker and how you listen, that responsiveness of getting back to them really fast is a big part of helping the speaker in a digital workplace. And you don't have to necessarily respond with content or a decision, but you do need to acknowledge that you have actually received their message and you're working on it, you're thinking about it, or you'll get back to them at a time when you can. But at least you acknowledge that, yes, you listened and received the message. Another important piece for helping speakers is to connect with them first on an emotional basis and then on content. And this is because, again, we miss so many cues about the emotional intensity of messages in the digital environment. So really trying to connect with somebody empathetically. Gee, you sound like you're really upset. Or, gee, that's terrific news. I'm so happy for you. But connect with that first and then get to the actual heart or content of what the message is. Also, you can help the speaker by matching their language and tone. If they're really excited and enthusiastic, you respond in kind in terms of your use of language and tone. If they're somewhat reticent or speaking more slowly or hesitant in any way, you can match that by dialing back your own responses. Another way to help speakers in digital environments is to really make use of standard conversation cues and transitions. And a lot of times we kind of look at this, especially in IM conversations, as being, well, that's a lot of fluff. I know they're going to say, hi, thank you for contacting me today. But it does set a tone, and it also kind of helps to set a tempo for the conversation. It also helps to guide someone through a conversation and let them know that you're tracking with them as a listener. It's especially important that when you ask questions of the speaker to help, to clarify, to confirm your understanding, that those questions be very short and targeted. In digital environments, long questions tend to get lost, and they also often tend to get misunderstood. So keep them very short and targeted, not compound and complex. You can also help the speaker by restating anything you've come to agreement on, whether it was a decision or next steps, or just I understand what you said. Restating it and letting them confirm is a huge help when we're missing other cues. And then finally, it's important to make closure or completion obvious. Particularly in IM conversations, sometimes they just go away and trail off, and you're not really quite sure, gee, was that person listening to my closure or not? And so saying, yep, that's all I have to talk about today, or yeah, I think we're done here, really makes a big difference. So in summarizing all of this, we could ask the question, how do we know when we're being listened to online? And I would say we know we're being listened to when we receive consistently prompt, and I mean consistently prompt, thoughtful, high quality, relevant, and personalized responses. And this is an incredibly tall order, I realize that. But I think once we know what we're aiming for, we can think of how to kind of reverse engineer everything that needs to happen in order for us to deliver that kind of listening experience to someone else. And that kind of pretty much naturally brings us to the flip side of this question, which is, how do you prove to someone that you're listening online? And here, the first two items, I think, are the most important, and they very much go together. Managing your perceived presence, and your perceived presence can actually be different than your actual presence, and prioritizing promptness and responsiveness, even if it is just acknowledging, yes, I got your message, I know you're trying to connect with me and have a conversation. I have actually a great example of managing perceived presence and providing incredible promptness, and it's thanks to our moderator, Sarah Montgomery, who's on today. A few months ago when I was working on another webinar with HRDQ, I was kind of in crunch mode over the weekend trying to get some work done and thinking ahead, and I had a few items that were just really bothering me and concerning me, and so I sent off an email on a Sunday afternoon to Sarah, and I felt a little twinge of guilt about begging her over the weekend, and then I also thought, oh well, there's no way that she's going to be responding over the weekend anyway, Laurie, so don't feel guilty about it. She'll get to you on Monday when she has a chance. And much to my surprise, I think it was literally 2 or 3 minutes later, I had a response pop up from Sarah on my smartphone, and from her smartphone saying, look, I'm out and about, I'm on a device, so I can't respond to everything, but she could tell that one particular item I brought up was really causing me concern and might cause me a few sleepless nights. And so she responded to that one right away and put my mind at ease. So you can imagine what my perception of her online presence went, through the ceiling, because here it is, a Sunday afternoon, and she responds to my question in, 2 or 3 minutes. And not only that, she does it in a way that acknowledges that only one of those items was really important, really urgent, and takes care of that one and says, we'll take care of the rest later in the week. And so that's a big thanks to Sarah for that example, and also a great a lesson to all of us in how that can be done very artfully. Other things to do to prove you're listening online include individualizing or customizing boilerplate responses. This is especially true when you're chatting with customers online, and I think our instinct is, we have certain things that we know we always say and we always respond with, but even using someone's name at the beginning of one of those kind of boilerplate responses, or making reference to a particular phrase that they used in their initiating message or email, goes a long way to helping the person feel that they're really being listened to and you're focusing in on them as an individual. Another way to prove you're listening online is if you're in a situation with either, let's say it's a group conference call, maybe it's a team meeting that happens weekly. You really need to actively moderate discussions and kind of have good meeting facilitation skills online that prove you're listening. So take action as needed, gatekeep actively, allow people to have the airspace they need, call out persons who may be interrupting and ask them to hold their comments until the other person is completed. You can also prove you're listening by taking the conversation sometimes in an entirely new direction, or by actively monitoring and clearly, taking care of things like there's really hostile comments or things are going off the rails, either removing it altogether or saying, hey, calling it out, this isn't acceptable. So those are some of the ways you can prove that you're listening online. I've got 2 other examples here. And one is from compliments of, JCPenney. If any of us have been watching their brand over the last couple of years, we know that they've had some challenges and they've gone through some organizational changes in how they've merchandised their stores, and also in management changes. And most recently this summer, they were making an effort to acknowledge all of these changes and to actively reconnect with their customers with a listening campaign on Facebook. And the details of this, I realize on the screen we really can't see a lot of the responses, but the key is that they opened up this channel of communication very specifically with customers, and then if you could see the responses, you would see that it's very clear they had someone assigned to be listening, to be extremely responsive to customers' comments, and to use that personalization so that the person understood it's not just somebody or kind of a robot response saying, yes, thank you for your response, but really acknowledging what content was in their message. So one example there. Another big one when you're listening to customers online is not just the speed of the reply or how personalized your response is, but it's also kind of the proof is in the pudding with, did you actually take some kind of follow-up action? And you see this quite a bit when you look at customer reviews, maybe on Travel Advisor or on Yelp, and someone from the company will get back and say, we thank you for your feedback. We're sorry you had a negative experience, or we're really glad you had a terrific experience, and here's what we're either going to do for you on your next visit, or here's what we're going to do to make up for a negative experience. So it is about follow-up action is a way to capture that message and then help the speaker understand that they were truly listened to. Let's have another example here. This one I love. This was posted on LinkedIn earlier this year by Dave Kirpin, and he was really frustrated checking into a hotel in Las Vegas for a major conference, and he tweeted this tweet that we see in front of us. And the hotel that he was frustrated with wasn't listening, or at least didn't tweet back to him, but a competitor did. And they responded in just 2 minutes. And I think that they did a great job of both connecting with responsiveness and then also connecting first with emotion, not just about content. And they did so without really, exploiting the communication on a commercial level. So they really, they closed out the conversation, but they also left the door open. So I think great example from a lot of perspectives. So I know we are running close on time, but I want to go through a couple more of these slides, particularly around managing or leveraging technology. And the long and the short of it is that technology makes our lives easier, and it can make listening easier, but it can also make it more difficult. So really what we need to do is learn to either leverage it and make the most of it, or we need to learn how to manage it. And some of the ways that we can make the most of it is everything from keeping your availability status current with reality. When you're on internal email or IM, if you're visible and you're available, then you should be. And if you're not, then you should make sure that you close that out and change your status before you leave your desktop. Otherwise, it could look like you're not listening. Other things that can really help is by being able to use keyboard shortcuts and custom autofill, although you need to be careful with that. But it can make you much faster at getting your responses out. Clearly, learn the IM lingo and etiquette, because that can also make you much faster and more effective. Other things are establishing automatic alerts with some of the search engines and also any of the customer review sites, so that you know when your company's name has come up, or you know when a topic that you need to be tracking has come up, and then you can respond right away. And another important one here is matching the device to the listening task. I know that for me personally, if I'm going to have a really intense phone conversation, I don't want to risk listening on a cell phone connection that may not be perfect, and so I try to schedule those and use a landline for that sort of thing. If I'm going to be in an IM conversation where it's very typing intensive, I'd much rather be using my Chromebook than trying to use my iPhone for that, whereas the iPhone's great for other shorter conversations and text messaging. So really be sensitive that the device you're using can either help you be a better listener or impede you. And in terms of managing or minimizing technology, a trend that I'm seeing coming on strong, especially on the West Coast, is either doing a digital detox or regularly observing a digital Sabbath, where you literally take a day off each week and you don't go near digital media or online communication channels. You might do this on a more temporary basis just by using a browser lockout or do not disturb settings if you're working on something. You can also focus in on either low-tech or no-tech conference rooms and enforce the idea of, this is a device-free meeting. We're going to talk to one another face-to-face without the aid of any technology, and no back-channel conversations going on. And finally, the other thing I'm seeing in terms of trends are people, an increase in silent retreats. And that seems to be getting lots of positive feedback. So those are some of the things that you can consider. So go through these last slides very quickly. Listening situations are not all equal. And this goes back to the third, fourth, and fifth strategies I talked about earlier on that were related to kind of, how do we apply situational leadership concepts to the idea of listening. And the core here is that all of us only have so much listening capacity in us. And listening is a very resource-intensive act. So you don't want to be wasting your resources on a very shallow listening situation. Save and allocate those resources for the situations that really deserve a deep listening experience. And when you look at a listening situation, there's a few ways that you can size it up. But basically, you want to look at how unique is it, how complex it is it, how intense from an emotional standpoint, and how risky or important is it. And think about that both in terms of outcome and relationship. And once you've sized up the situation, then you can pretty much characterize it as being, oh, this is a pretty shallow listening situation. I don't have to be spending all of my deep capacity on it. It's, it's routine, it's pretty tactical, it's with a familiar relationship. There's really, it's either mild emotion or no emotion. And, hey, it's short term, there's no long-term impact here. Versus, wow, this is really a complex situation. It's exceptional. It hasn't happened before. It's going to be all new to me. It's a new relationship. There's really strong emotions involved, and it's going to have a long-term impact on myself or my firm. That's when you want to say, this is a situation that warrants deep listening. And you can think about this allocation of listening capacity both at the individual level and at the organizational level. So one thing we do know is that organizations and leaders who listen perform better. And as a result of this, building a culture of listening can pay a lot of dividends in an organization. When you think about all of the people that listening matters to, your employees, your customers, your suppliers, this entire universe of people, it makes it pretty clear that making the investment in fundamental listening skills for your employees, and then also having a real acknowledgement of the challenges around listening in a digital workplace and how listening online is very different from listening in person. Just acknowledging that within an organization can make a big difference in the quality of the listening. One last item I do want to point out, the last bullet point, is this concept of implementing listening tours with your key stakeholders. Earlier this spring, a nonprofit organization that I was involved with had some issues with their executive directors board, and they realized that they really needed to reconnect with their key constituents and members, and they implemented a deep listening tour nationwide in order to say, hey, we know that we haven't been doing a great job of this, and now we're going to allocate all of our listening capacity to this need over the next several months. So that's a concept that might come of use to many of us. So thank you for being here today, and I will turn it back to Sarah.
Thank you so much, Laurie, and thank you everyone for listening today. We are out of time for a live Q&A, but Laurie will be reviewing all of the questions that come in on this webinar. And what we're going to do is you go ahead and type in your question, and then we're going to capture all of those together. Laurie's going to respond to all of those in one document, and we'll actually email that document out to everyone on the call today. That way everyone can get benefit from the questions that have come in from other fellow webinar attendees here, and hear Laurie's response on those too. So go ahead and send those in. I do want to share with you that today's presentation is the foundation of the Learning to Listen facilitator materials. This is a self-assessment as well, and it comes with both a self-assessment and a workbook. It is available in an online and paper version. And you do get a discount for joining us here today. It's 50% off the facilitator set. This is our new 3rd edition. It's recently revised. We're very excited about the revisions that have been made. So go ahead and check that out. We have free 30 days for you to be able to look at that, and that's good until Friday, December 13th. We'll stay on the line here for another minute or so, allow those questions to come in, but we do hope that you enjoyed the session today and that you found the webinar enjoyable. Thanks so much, Laurie.